When you're 3 months into something good and you start finding reasons to end it, not because they did anything wrong, not because you don't care, but because somewhere deep inside a voice whispers, this won't last anyway. Yeah, that pattern is what I want to talk about today. There's this thing that happens when relationships feel temporary before they even get a chance to be real. And I'm not talking about commitment phobes who ghost after the first date. Sometimes it's quieter than that. It could be sabotaging things right when they get good, or picking fights over nothing when intimacy starts to build, or even dating people you know deep down aren't right for you, because leaving them will hurt less. Something that doesn't get talked about much is this. The people who can't keep relationships aren't afraid of love. They're terrified of what comes after. Let me illustrate this better for you. There's a person, maybe in their late 20s, and they've just met someone who checks all the boxes. Kind, present, genuinely interested. Not because they went looking for perfect, but because for once something feels easy, and something shifts. Instead of leaning in, they start pulling away. Psychologists call this attachment avoidance, when someone unconsciously creates distance in relationships to protect themselves from anticipated pain. But that clinical term doesn't quite capture it, does it? It doesn't capture the panic that sets in when someone gets too close, or the exhausting mental gymnastics of finding flaws in someone who's actually good for you. Dr. Amir Levin, who wrote the book Attached, found that people with avoidant attachment patterns often genuinely want connection, but, and this is crucial, their nervous system learned early on that closeness equals danger. It's not a choice they're making, it's a survival mechanism that's still running decades later. That idea tends to linger. What felt like protection back then is sabotage right now. Now, many people who struggle to keep relationships notice they become very good at certain things. Independence. You could handle everything alone and never ask for help. Self-reliance became your superpower because depending on others felt risky. Emotional control was second nature because vulnerability wasn't safe. Where it starts to show up later is here. Those same superpowers you developed, they come with a price tag you didn't know you'd be paying in your 30s and 40s.
You know what's quite fascinating? People who can't keep relationships often struggle the most with the simplest things, not the dramatic breakups or major conflicts. Somehow they can handle those with their eyes closed. It's the small stuff, letting someone see you cry, staying when things get boring instead of exciting, being, consistently present without an exit strategy. Those feel almost dangerous to them. Because when you learned early on that people leave, that love comes with conditions, that showing your real self means rejection, you didn't just learn a lesson, you built an entire operating system around it. And that system is still running. Let me tell you what this looks like in adulthood. Often, people like this become the one who ends things first. Always the person who says, I'm just not ready for something serious, even when they are. You're attracted to people who are unavailable, married, emotionally distant, living in another country. Now, I know that makes it sound like you have terrible taste, but it's actually because unavailable feels safer. It's a relationship with built-in distance, which means built-in protection. Intimacy becomes the real challenge. Not sex, not romance, not the fun early days. Intimacy. The kind where someone knows how you take your coffee and notices when you're pretending to be fine. That level of being known feels exposing, because being fully seen was a luxury you couldn't afford back then. So even now, even when you're with someone safe, even when they're not going anywhere, there's this part of you that starts building walls the moment they get close. You might find yourself picking fights right after moments of real connection. And before you blame yourself for that, understand this. Conflict creates distance. Distance feels like breathing room, and breathing room feels like safety. So when someone offers you consistent love, consistent presence, it might actually feel oddly wrong, uncomfortable, like waiting for the inevitable disappointment. There's also this thing with the 3-month mark, or the 6-month mark, or whatever arbitrary timeline your nervous system has decided is too close. Right when things should be getting easier, everything suddenly feels suffocating. You start cataloging their flaws. Their way they chew becomes unbearable. Their laugh sounds different. Suddenly you need space, or time to think, or you're not sure about this anymore. And here's the cruel part. You know you're doing it. Some part of you is watching yourself sabotage something good and screaming, "Stop! What are you doing?" But the louder voice, the older voice, the one that's been protecting you since you were small, that voice says, "Leave before they leave you." The exhaustion from this is real, by the way. That bone-deep tiredness that comes from constantly being on guard in your own relationship, analyzing every text, monitoring their tone, looking for signs they're losing interest so you can beat them to the exit. Your nervous system never learned what true safety feels like in connection, because safety meant independence.
And the cruel reality? The world actually rewards this. Society loves people who don't need anyone. If you think about it, we're celebrated for being independent. We're praised for not being needy or clingy. We're admired for being self-sufficient and emotionally controlled. We're the low-maintenance partner everyone says they want. But nobody asks what it cost us to become this way. Nobody asks about the relationships we destroyed to maintain our fortress of independence. There's something else that happens too. You become fluent in a language most people never have to learn, and that is the language of exit strategies. You're able to map out exactly how a relationship will end before it even begins. You can identify all the incompatibilities on the first date, like a detective gathering evidence for a case you're building against your own happiness. You maintain emotional distance while appearing perfectly present, a performance so convincing that even you forget you're performing. And the strangest part? You might not even realize you're doing it anymore. It's just automatic, like breathing, except breathing is supposed to keep you alive. And this slowly isolates you from the very thing you actually want. You probably have moments where you're surrounded by people, friends, family, maybe even a partner, and you still feel completely alone. Not lonely in the obvious way, alone in the sense that nobody really knows you, because letting them know you would require staying, and staying feels impossible when every cell in your body is screaming, "Run." And asking for help with this feels like admitting you're fundamentally broken, like proving that you are, in fact, too much and not enough at the same time. So what do you do with all of this? How do you heal from something that feels like just who you are? Because it wasn't one dramatic heartbreak. It was watching love be conditional or inconsistent, or watching people you needed disappear. First, you have to grieve. And I know that sounds dramatic, but you're grieving something real. You're grieving the ability to trust that good things can last. The version of you who could have loved freely, who could have been messy and uncertain and still been chosen. That part of you deserved better. And saying that out loud doesn't make you a victim. It makes you honest about what was lost. Secondly, you've got to learn, and this is the hard part, that leaving first isn't the same as being safe. That your worth isn't measured by how little you need from others, that independence taken to the extreme becomes isolation. You are not a fortress. You're a human being wired for connection, and connection requires risk. You're allowed to stay when it gets boring. You're allowed to not have an exit plan. You're even allowed to need someone and have them actually show up, and to let that change your understanding of what's possible. And maybe most importantly, you're allowed to be a beginner at receiving consistent love, because that's what you are. The fact that you're 30 or 40 or 50 doesn't change that you never really learned how to let someone stay. So be patient with yourself as you learn.
Here's what I want you to understand. Your attachment style is not a life sentence. Dr. Sue Johnson, who developed emotionally focused therapy, has shown that attachment patterns can heal when we have what she calls corrective emotional experiences. That means finding someone safe and, instead of running when your nervous system panics, staying long enough to realize that this time, closeness doesn't equal loss.
That part of you who learned to leave before being left, who built walls so high nobody could hurt you, who chose loneliness over the risk of abandonment, they did an incredible job keeping you safe. They were resourceful and protective and intelligent beyond measure. But they can rest now. They're not forced to guard the door anymore. It's safe to let someone in. It's safe to believe that this time might be different, even if you're terrified it won't be. You've been holding yourself at arm's length from love for so long. What would it feel like to finally let yourself be held? If this hit home for you, please subscribe.